Terror in London. Several people killed and a policeman stabbed to death after a car has driven into pedestrians near the British Parliament. And did Russia collude with Trump's campaign in last year's U.S. election? The FBI's director confirms an investigation into Team Trump is underway. We'll examine the fallout from the biggest stories of the past 7 days. This is Insight Review. Welcome to Insight Review from our studios in London, a city still reeling from a terrorist attack carried out on the doorstep of one of the world's most famous landmarks, the Palace of Westminster. 2 people were killed as the attacker careened across Westminster Bridge in a 2-ton vehicle. Dozens of people were mowed down, with one woman falling into the River Thames below. The victims came from 11 different countries. A policeman was stabbed and killed as the attacker tried to force his way through the entrance to the UK Parliament. He was then shot and killed by an armed officer. In just a moment, we'll examine those events with our guests, the editor-in-chief at the International Interest, Sami, Hamdi, and the writer and commentator Shyama Perara. But first, as Westminster Bridge reopens, we trace the path taken by the attacker with a former London police firearms officer. Tony Long, you've been a firearms officer for 25 years during your career. You've written a book on the subject called Lethal Force. Tell me, how, looking down this bridge, do you prevent an incident like this, a car driving up on the sidewalk?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, you could do all sorts of things, but realistically, if they're going to have an attack of this nature, it's going to happen and there's going to be casualties. All you can really hope to deal with is minimise them, after the event. London's a huge capital. Where do you decide to put the bollards?
There are hundreds of people that cross this bridge every day, and they get married here, they take photographs here, they're tourists. How do you protect the public?
Well, you're right. I think the difficulty is that people, look at London in its entirety, and do we put bollards down that street over there, over that next bridge, because you can see the Palace of Westminster?
You mean concrete barriers to prevent cars from coming out?
I know, it's the British way to want to minimise any change of normality. There was huge issues around, public unhappiness about putting barriers outside the Palace of Westminster. Unfortunately, it takes a tragedy before, sometimes we wake up to the realities of it.
The vehicle came up against a steel barrier. He entered Parliament around the corner. Why, the first policeman he encounters who was stabbed, why wasn't he armed?
Well, because, we have an unarmed police force. That is our tradition, and it might seem crazy to your viewers around the world. And I've got to say, for me personally, I think it's crazy, but that is the way it is. In the Metropolitan Police, there are about 30,000 officers, of which just over 2,000 are trained in the use of firearms. The open face that members of the public meet when they arrive at the Palace of Westminster, whether as tourists or whether on business, is unarmed officers.
Dangerous tradition.
My personal feeling is that it is, but that's my personal feeling.
In the end, after he stabs the policeman, it's only when a close protection officer, not one of the regular gun teams assigned to Parliament, sees him, gets out of a car and shoots him.
Well, I don't know where the other officers were positioned. Normally there are armed officers in that location. It may well be that the officer that fired the shots just happened to be the closest in that particular situation, or the other officers were dealing with someone else in a short distance away. I don't know, so I would be surmising, and I wouldn't want to do that. But the reality is that yes, we now know it was a close protection officer as opposed to one of the uniformed overt protection officers that actually fired the shots.
Do you think things have to change behind these steel gates?
I think things have to change across the whole country. If you want to maintain an unarmed police force, you have to accept that innocent people, and some of those will be police officers sadly as well, are probably going to get killed before an armed officer can get to the scene to deal with it.
If there is one lesson to be learned out of this very tragic event, what would it be for you?
The reality is that it's nice to have an unarmed police force. It's nice to think that your society is peaceful enough that you don't require one. But, I think times are changing, and I think realistically what they're going to have to do is look to the future and say, in the future, police officers that join after a certain date are going to have to be prepared to carry a firearm, and they must start seriously looking, you know, at routinely arming police officers.
The questions of more guns for police. There was a survey done with the Met last year. They talked to about a third of the officers, 11,000 policemen.
Yeah.
6% believed, only 6% believe there's adequate numbers of guns on the street. 26% all said that there should be some routinely armed.
Okay.
But then ironically, you take a look at most police say they will not carry a gun.
My opinion personally is that's quite naive, because it can happen suddenly, and when it happens, the first time you need that gun is when you actually need it. Now, if you go to places, and everybody generalises about the United States, but there's police officers probably in the New York Police Department that work on outer parts of the New York Police Department that have never drawn their gun operationally and pointed them at a suspect. It happens, but there's a perception that that's the case. But the one time they do need it, they've got it with them. And this is my issue. In this country, there is a perception that if all police officers carried guns, then it would change the way in which we conduct business. And my personal experience that isn't the case.
Joining me on today's program is the writer and commentator Shyama Perara and the editor-in-chief of the International Interest, Sami Hamdi. Welcome to you both. Before we get started, let's go over the timeline of the events from Wednesday's attack. The incident began around 2:30 p.m. As you may know, the attacker drove a car into a number of pedestrians, killing 2 people and causing a woman to fall into the River Thames. She was later pulled out alive with serious injuries. The vehicle was then driven to Parliament Square, running over more people before crashing into a barrier around the Palace of Westminster. And 52-year-old Khalid Massoud then entered the grounds of Parliament, stabbed and killed a police officer, and he was then shot dead by another officer. Shyama, I want to start with you because you were shaking your head as you were watching the comments from Tony Long calling for more guns. Why?
I think if you live in London, you are used to seeing police with guns, and as all your footage shows, Dana, there were hundreds of police with guns there within seconds. I mean, that is immediate. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, you've got groups of armed officers on the spot. We are not short of armed officers in the centre of London. The fact is, somebody ran through on foot with a knife and got one of the officers who was not armed with his knife. He was shot almost instantly. I'm not understanding why this is seen as bad practice in security terms. I think it's extraordinary that you can have an attack like this and only one police officer is hurt before the whole scene is dealt with by the police. And
I guess the question would be, around Parliament you have a lot of guns. So if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. But the real conversation begins on Westminster Bridge, doesn't it? Because that's where the incident starts. So
sure, but I was on Westminster Bridge 2.5 hours earlier. If I decided to do something demented, I could have driven at these people. The point being that you cannot stop a lunatic in a car by arming your police.
And it happened within seconds, Sami?
Absolutely.
Look, at the end of the day, my biggest issue with this whole particular problem with whether there should be guns in the streets or not is that let's take the hyperbole out of this situation for a second and let's take out the words terrorist and the like, and let's imagine that this is, I don't know, like a gang crime that takes place in another area of London, which happens quite often, in fact much more often than this situation takes place. The debate doesn't come out. We don't discuss about whether police should have more guns or not. It seems to be just a daily part of London life. Well,
the debate does come out if that policeman was unarmed in a gang situation and he would knife to death. There would certainly be a conversation about why he wasn't armed or why he was there exposed like that.
No, look, I'll be honest with you. I'll be honest with you. I'm born and raised in London. I've lived here all my life. The gun debate is a very American debate. We don't have it here in the UK. We don't have it here in London at all, which is why I'm pretty surprised that this has come up here. Now,
let me ask you both then. Why did the Met last year say that there is a problem? They do not have enough guns on the street. They want more than 1,000 UK-wide more firearms officers and another 600 in London. Why is the Met itself saying that?
But Dana, I don't think anybody has a problem if the Met wants it with us having more armed officers on the street. We have quite a few. The argument that was being given there was that all police officers should be trained in the use of firearms and should be issued with firearms.
Well, there is a full spectrum there, isn't there?
Yeah, that is where you will find deep resistance from within the police itself, as was stated there, but also from the citizens of the UK, where gun crime is tiny. It's a tiny, tiny percentage of any crime in the UK. Very rarely are police involved in gun crime, except like with Jean-Charles Menezes, where they actually are shooting people dead who are not guilty of anything. You know, it's not an issue, and this incident is being blown up. It is a terrible atrocity, but at the end of the day, it was a man with a knife and a car. That's what it was. You can give everybody in London a gun. We would have all shot each other.
Would you not agree it's healthy, look, regardless of where you line up on any of this, to have a debate about security when something has happened like this? I mean, you have to take a look at it and say, was there a way of not having a policeman lose his life in the line of duty that day?
The issue is not whether the debate should be had or not. The issue is that the debate has come about after this particular incident. There are much more worse incidents that have taken place across London. This just happened to get significant media attention. I mean, let's look at the very crude facts here. A man with a knife in a 4x4 was driving on Westminster. He opened his door, he got out of his car and he ran towards Parliament and he stabbed a police officer. It's no more than that. The problem with this particular issue is that the big hyperbole surrounding it has now brought Islam into it, the politics, the communal tensions in the society. All of these things where if you were to just stand back and look at these crude facts, you think, how on earth did this happen in the first
We're
place?
conflating the political instinct of the person who did it with the actual crime.
Okay, if we're discussing how we elevate the debate or how the debate is steered in the aftermath of a tragic event, there is nobody more prominent and on the front line than Prime Minister Theresa May, who stands up in Parliament and says, this is an attack on democracy and freedom of speech. Let's listen to what she said.
The values our Parliament represents: democracy, freedom, human rights, the rule of law, command the admiration and respect of free people everywhere. That is why it is a target for those who reject those values. But let me make it clear today, as I have had cause to do before, any attempt to defeat those values through violence and terror is doomed to failure.
So should the Prime Minister have come into Parliament the next day and say this is nothing more than a guy with a gun in a truck and
But every crime against a person is a crime against human rights. And of course, if a man murders his wife, if a mother murders her child, all of those values are called into question. What is important here is the idea that this was a strike against democracy. Well, I'm not quite sure how a man with a knife is a strike against democracy.
Sami?
It's made us more democratic.
Overstated, or do you agree with the Prime Minister?
Here's the issue. The Prime Minister had to react. I mean, with all the media attention surrounding it, the fact that it was an attack on Parliament, she had to react, and she did what any other Prime Minister would do, which is come out and say, look, we are safe, we are united against terrorism and the like. The issue here is this. She said, they are trying to attack our values. Who is they? This man with a knife in a car who was driving? Because even though ISIS have claimed the issue, it's hard to believe that ISIS, who are blockaded in Raqqa in Syria, sent an agent over those planks of wood across the Mediterranean.
Well, we don't know yet.
As in ISIS have claimed it. What I'm saying is, if she's mentioning ISIS as they, well, ISIS can't have possibly have committed this particular atrocity. The issue here is this. The rhetoric that is being used automatically implies that there is some sort of community, some sort of body that attacked our democracy yesterday on Westminster Bridge. The reality is a deranged lunatic lone wolf, let's use the terms that were used with the killer of Joe Cox, a lone wolf, a deranged lunatic individual. Let's use the same terminology that the US likes to use with white supremacist shooters when they go about and kill universities and the like. Let's use the same rhetoric. A lone wolf, deranged lunatic took a knife, went and stabbed a police officer yesterday in Westminster. It's nothing to do with the community. It's nothing to do with any sort of social ties or any sort of political issue.
Right,
yes,
well, I think the facts are not in yet. I mean, but in fairness, because the police want to know what his links were, the police want to know what he was motivated. Was he a member of a group? Was he motivated by a group? Was he recruited online?
He was a Kent-born man who changed his name when he converted to Islam. He is a criminal with a long criminal record. I mean, this is not somebody who has been raised, I don't know, in some country where he's been oppressed and is striking against Western democracy.
It's a really important debate that you're raising. Sami, I want to come back to you. Of course you can.
Just make one particular point. Let's look at the way this attack was carried out. This wasn't a sophisticated attack. This wasn't bombs that detonated inside Parliament. This wasn't bombs on a bridge like we saw with 7/7. This was a very primitive style of attack. I mean, if you're talking about a group, is that the best they can come up with?
Let me ask you then, because it's a debate within the media that we have. How do we handle this, not give him too much prominence, but it is an attack on Parliament, so we cover it.
Yeah.
but at the same time, how do we not turn this into a great debate between the three monotheistic religions and how the interface dialogue? And I mean, people feel that it goes too far in coverage.
Of course. The way we do it, and I'm in media as well, and we discuss, and we were all here, we discussed it. The way we use it, we deal with it is we use the correct rhetoric. So when Michael Fallon comes out and says this looks like Islamic terrorism, that is incorrect rhetoric. That is inflammatory rhetoric. That is dangerous rhetoric for not just the security of the UK, but
so it's not the proportion of coverage, but you disagree with the rhetoric.
But even the rhetoric. So for example, they say we are treating this as a potential terrorist attack. Why can't we treat it as a potential lone wolf who's come on Westminster Bridge and is stabbed up? Because let's be real here. If you're an ordinary citizen living in Steyning near Brighton or in anywhere in the UK, and you hear the word terrorist, you automatically switch on your TV. Have we been attacked? Is it a terrorist attack? If you say it's a lone wolf lunatic on a bridge, people start thinking it's a game of cat and mouse.
Shyama, final thought on this, because we're going to have to move on to another topic.
I think we just have to get past this, Dana. And in the UK, I honestly think in this great city, London, we are already past it, but the world's media will continue to inflame the arguments around it.
All right, thank you both. Let's carry on. This is Insight Review. Coming up, the FBI director hits back at President Trump over those allegations that Obama wiretapped his phone.